Hello, and welcome to a special April 1st ACM Learning webinar. This webcast is part of ACM's commitment to lifelong learning and serving the over 100,000 computing professionals and students who are ACM's members. I'm Will Trace, your friendly used program salesman, who is also the most recent past chair of ACM SIGSOFT, a special interest group on software engineering, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with ACM or what it has to offer, ACM offers educational and professional development resources that bolster skills and enhance career opportunities. Members can stay competitive in a constantly changing range of ACM learning resources at learning.acm.org. You can see some of those highlights on your screen. ACM recognizes the role of computing in driving the innovations that sustain competitiveness in the global environment. ACM provides timely computing information published by ACM, including communications with ACM and Q magazines, access to the ACM Digital Library, the world's most comprehensive database on computing literature, and international conferences that draw experts on a broad spectrum of computing topics. Finally, we focus on support for education and research, including curriculum development, teacher training, the ACM Turning, and ACM Emphasis Foundations Award, just to mention a few others. ACM enables its members to solve critical problems using new technology that enriches our lives and advances our society in the digital age. I'd also like to highlight the second ACM Applicative Conference, which brings together researchers and practitioners to share the latest technologies and trends in computing. The conference is split into two tracks, one for application developers and one for system software developers. This year's event is hosted by NYU, June 1st and 2nd. Click on the applicative link in the resource list on your screen for more information. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly mention a few housekeeping items for those who have not joined us in the past. First, the slides will advance automatically through the event. On the bottom panel, you'll find a number of additional widgets and resources. If you're experiencing problems with the slides or audio, press F5 in Windows, Command-R in Mac, or refresh your browser on a mobile device. Of course, you can always relaunch the presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A box at any time during the webinar and click the Submit button. I'll organize the questions for Seth as he speaks, and we'll have time at the end of the presentation to address some of them. This session is being recorded and will be archived. You will receive an automatic email notification when it becomes available, and check learning.acm.org for updates on this and upcoming webcasts. At the end of the presentation, you'll see a survey in your browser. Fill out to help us improve the webinar. You can also use the Facebook and Twitter widgets on the bottom panel to share a presentation link with your friends, as well as tweet comments and questions using the hashtag #ACMLearning. Today's presentation is Yoga, a software development process based on ancient principles by Seth Winis. Seth Winis is a software development guru and yoga expert. He has many years of development experience at places such as AS&T, Lucid, Motorola, and the Software Feasibility Consortium, not to mention the Numerical Research Laboratory in Hawaii. He has also spent time in academia as a professor of software engineering at MOU and others. Seth was recommended as a webinar speaker by Dave Weiss, longtime researcher and software engineer, as well as an IEEE fellow. He encouraged Seth to publish his ideas on yoga. David has worked in industry and places such as Bell Labs, Avaya, Software Productivity Consortium, and in the government at the Naval Research Lab in the Office of Technology Assessment. In academia, where he was professor of software engineering at Iowa State University. He's now retired, with time to step back and inject some humor into his history in software engineering. Seth, without further ado, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Will, and thank all of you for coming and listening today. I must tell you that I am usually used to talking in front of audiences where I can see and hear everyone, so this is a slightly different experience for me. I hope it will be a good experience for all of us. I thank Will for making this possible. I also thank Dave Weiss, my colleague and mentor, and almost my alter ego, one might say. And also I thank Fapsan Rat, who has been my mentor and friend for many years. Both of them encouraged me to do this and to think about this subject. And I'm going to start by telling you just a little bit about my motivations here and how this idea of using yoga as a basis for software development came about. I started as a software developer very early in my career. I was in my early 20s. I had never really intended to go into software development. I just stumbled on it, but it captivated me. It was the most fun, technically, of anything I'd ever done, and I decided to make it my life career, and I just became embedded in it and fascinated by it. A little bit later in my career, I started the practice of yoga. I took up yoga because I wanted to help my body to stay in good shape, to stay strong, and to stay flexible, and also because I thought yoga helped me clear my mind and enabled me to concentrate. After some years of both doing yoga and doing software development, I began to see parallels, things that really were the same in both. And I began thinking about how to use yoga principles in my software development practices, and of course also in how to use ideas from software development in yoga. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the latter. I will talk about the former, however. It helps in this if you happen to know a little bit about yoga. So there's a little poll that should be showing on your screen asking if you have ever done yoga. So the more of you who have done yoga, I hope the more of you will be able to follow some of the details. But if you've never done yoga, you don't need to worry about it. I will try to give explanations. So if you would, please respond to that poll, and I'll have a little better idea of how many people actually have some background. And I can see from the early results that about half of you actually have done yoga. So that's good. I hope you won't be too bored when I go into some explanations of some of the yoga postures. Now, just one other little introductory remark. After developing software for a while, my goals for software development became fairly clear to me. One is I wanted to develop sustainable software. What does that mean? I wanted software that would last a long time, that would be of high quality, that would be easy to change, that would appeal to a large marketplace of people. I am sure that all of you out there who are software developers, in fact, have very similar goals. Of course, some of you might just find it fun the way I did and just enjoy getting out there and writing code, but you always want to be sure you write good code that can be changed easily, that has very few bugs in it. And finally, my other goal, once I got into a position where I was directing projects and managing projects and so forth and working in larger projects, was to have a happy development team. I wanted my developers to enjoy what they were doing, to be confident that they were producing good results, to be learning, and generally to have fun and look forward to what they were doing every day. So what yoga focuses on then is flexibility, that is, ability to make changes when you think about it from the software point of view. It focuses on strengthening your core, which in yoga terms is essentially the middle part of your body, your back, your stomach, the abdomen, and those areas. In software development, we will see what it means is that there are certain developers who do most of the work. Those are your core developers. You want to make sure you have a good set of core developers. Yoga also focuses on building strength and on building endurance. We want all of that in our software development teams, at least I do. And as I'm sure you've noticed, we have more and more people going into software development these days. Well, even our president has said that he thinks everybody should learn to code. I'm not sure I'd go that far, and I don't know if you would. But As we look around, we see software everywhere. And I know I don't have to tell you about that, but if you think about the future, what's going to happen with software, we will see software more and more in more and more places. I will just make one prediction for you along these lines, and then I'm going to go back to the main points. You will see software embedded in your body more and more. I believe strongly that in a few years, when you are born, you will have a device embedded, perhaps behind your ear, that will act just like our smartphones act today. That device will be governed by software. And we, and I do mean we, you and me and all the people listening in and involved in software development, had better be sure that that software is sustainable and of high quality. Okay, enough said about that. So what exactly then are the underlying principles behind yoga? And I've just sort of summarized them. There are 10 principles there, and what I'm going to do is go through each of these in turn. I expect that will take me the next 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes worth of questions. So the first point is look ahead. Second point is don't try to be rational. Maybe that sounds funny to you. Software developers tend to be very rational people, but I'll explain a little more what that means. Third point is try to meditate on your code every day. Fourth point is to hold a Scrum meeting every day, and I will tell you what that means. Fifth is to be flexible, then to rotate often, strengthen your core, improve your balance, salute the sun. For those of you who've had some yoga experience, I'm sure you know what salute the sun is, but I will talk more about that. And then finally, to do some relaxation, to relax every day. Have a little chant that you use like, oh. Again, if you've taken any yoga, you've seen this. I'm sure it's something that you know and you realize. So let's go to the first point. One is ignore the past and look ahead. Now you know that yoga stands for you only go ahead. Many people give you advice about, well, go back and examine your mistakes and all. They try to tell you that if you ignore history, you're going to repeat it. I don't believe that that's true. If we look at the data, the data shows you that improvement is never steady. Even if you go back to some of the old publications in software development, you will see that they discovered there's about a constant number of bugs that are found in every release. That was one of the early papers on studying bugs. And also these days, our technology is changing very, very quickly. Got to keep up with the new technology. You want to forge ahead. Just to illustrate this point, there's a little a chart down at the bottom of the slide. I'm on slide 8. I hope everybody else is on slide 8 at the moment too. It shows you the history of releases for a software system. This was a real system, comes out of a company actually where Dave Weiss worked at some point. And this is a series of releases, and for each release, it shows the number of bugs found by customers 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months after the release. So the red is 1 month, the orange is 3 months, and the yellow is 6 months. And you can see when the releases first start, there are a lot of bugs that are being found by customers within 1 month after the customer installs the system. Things tend to improve slightly for a while, up to about release 3, and then they pretty much stay the same for a while. So don't worry so much about what you did in the past. You gotta forge ahead. Second point is don't try to be rational. There is no such thing as a rational design process. Those of you who've been in the field for a little while may be familiar with a paper by David Parnas, one of the giants of software engineering, and Paul Clements, one of his associates, called A Rational Design Process, How and Why to Fake It. What do they mean by that? Well, look ahead one more slide, and you'll see that when you start a project, you have this rational plan in mind. First, you're going to go do A, and then you may split and have several alternative paths that eventually all come back together again. And at a number of different points, you have milestones or decisions you have to make, like B, C, D, E, F, and G. and you have it all nicely planned when you start. Unfortunately, as those of you who have any experience know, that is not the reality. If you look at the next slide, which is slide 11 there now, what happens is you get to something like point B, where you're supposed to be producing some artifact or making some decision, and you discover, oh, the customer changed his or her mind, or, oh, circumstances are different, or the environment has changed, or, oh, I made a mistaken assumption. I got to go back and change what I did at A. So you have to go back, and then C gets different, and F changes, and you have all these changes. That little figure down on the left is a project manager slowly going crazy as he or she has to try to keep track of all these changes and what has to happen. So don't expect things to be rational. It just does not happen in the real world. If you read that paper, which I highly recommend, you notice it says how and why to fake it. Now, I won't go into the details of faking a rational process. I will let you read the paper to discover that. But it has some very good advice for software developers and for software development. Next point in the 10 yoga principles is to meditate on the code every day. This is really a key principle in yoga, and it is one of the places where the yoga and software engineering come together very closely. If you are a good software engineer, what you are concerned with is how hard or easy it is to make changes to your code. Why is that? Well, software development is a process of change. Every day you go in there and you're making changes. So what's important to know is what's easy to change and what's hard to change. How could I make it easier? Even more, something that we don't always think about is what is worth changing. What's the value of every change? How much is it going to cost to make a change? How much is it going to cost if I do it? How much is it going to cost if somebody else has to do it? And I can tell you, although I know most developers with whom I'm familiar and with whom I've worked are honest, straightforward people, every once in a while you will meet somebody who puts some things in the code that make it almost impossible for somebody else to change it. So what you would like to do is meditate on the code you're working with, and it may not be code you wrote, as I'm sure you know. Meditate on the code that you're working with for at least an hour a day, thinking about issues of change. What's going to be easy? What's the value of the changes I'm thinking about? What are the costs of the changes I'm thinking about? This, by the way, leads into a whole area of economics. You can think of changes as options and try to apply option theory, because it may be that you design for certain changes and you never make some of those changes, but other changes you do make. And then, of course, to come back to the present reality, you have to say, what should I change today? Have to think about what you're going to do right now. We will come back to that point in just a minute. Now, I said I wanted my team members all to be happy and to be confident in what they were doing and to enjoy what they are doing. I think that means they need to think of themselves as a team. And as a team, they should hold a meeting every day. We call this a strum meeting. Why a strum meeting? Because I want people to be relaxed during the meeting. So what we do is we usually have a guitarist who comes in and strums during the course of the meeting, trying to keep everybody relaxed. And then as part of our strum meeting, first of all, everybody stands up, by the way, during the strum meeting. And just as an aside, the largest stand-up meeting I ever attended had 200 people. Could you believe that? 200 people in a stand-up meeting. Of course, it wasn't a meeting about software development. It's a completely different area. But this was long ago, back in the 1980s or so, and the stand-up meetings I attended then worked very well. So what happens in the strum meeting? Well, You want to know what people are doing. Everybody wants to know what everybody else is doing. So everybody proposes a change. And of course, the change they proposed was based on the meditation they did about their code. So everybody stands up and talks about their meditation. Then there's going to be a vote on what changes to make today. Now, I know some of you are sitting back there and saying, well, it can't be just a vote. Somebody has to decide. What if the vote comes out even or something like that? So there are variations you could have on this, but in general, we would like to have a vote to see how people feel about it and to see what changes most people think are worthwhile. Again, this could be a very tense meeting, so we have the guitarist sitting there and strumming. If you can get an actual copy of these slides, you will see. If you click on the little speaker there, you will hear a nice, relaxing guitar rhythm. Now, generally, a strum meeting works well with teams of about 10 or less. Remember, it's a stand-up meeting. Everybody has to stand up. And usually, it will be run by the yoga master who understands how to help people get relaxed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And also how to make progress during the strum meeting. Okay, I've talked a lot about changes, so I just kind of want to make this a separate point. You need to be flexible. Now, of course, if you've ever taken yoga, you know that in a lot of ways, yoga is about flexibility. They try to teach you to be flexible. Same thing for software development. They try to teach you to be flexible about the code and write code that is flexible and sustainable, can be changed. So what you want to do is try to make a change a day. You want to try to pick a change that everyone likes. That means everybody will know what kind of changes are going on. So you choose a daily change during the strum meeting. So it wouldn't be fair if I didn't give you some idea of how you go about thinking about these changes. So I think of this in terms of product line engineering. I don't know how many of you have heard about software product line engineering. It's becoming quite popular, especially in the larger companies these days. There's even a whole conference developed to software product line engineering. And if you really want to know about software product line engineering, I recommend that you read my colleague Dave Weiss's book on it, which comes up as a reference in a little while. But in product line engineering, you think of commonalities and variabilities. You think of yourself as developing a family of products. So what you want to do is have some common set of resources, of code that can be easily changed to produce the different products. Right? And when we look around the world today, we see all sorts of families of products. And you can look at them and say, well, how did they manage to do that? If you look at the automobile industry, for example, every automobile maker has an assembly line that produces quite a variety of automobiles, quite a variety of products. But there are limits to it. They must have thought in advance about what the variabilities are going to be and what the commonalities are going to be. So if we look at the next slide, which is slide 15, here's a little example to help you think more about variabilities. This example is taken from the floating weather station system. Now, floating weather stations are weather stations that float around the world, and they measure the environment, particularly important for climate change these days. But they measure things like air temperature, water temperature, wind speed, and so forth. If you are interested in this topic, there is an online site about them maintained by NOAA. The link to that site is on there, and if you go to that site, you will see a map, a worldwide map of floating weather stations. And it shows them all over the world. You can click on any particular floating weather station on that map and see the data from that floating weather station. So, of course, they're not all exactly the same. There's variability in the floating weather stations. So here I've tried to give you some examples of the variabilities you might think about for floating weather stations. The number of wind speed sensors that the floating weather station has, the resolution of each sensor, the period at which the sensor is sampled, the format of the messages that the floating weather station transmits back to some home base, how often messages are transmitted, etc. I'm sure if you think about this, you can come up with a number of other variabilities. I didn't list any of the commonalities, but commonalities are going to be things like every floating weather station monitors the environment and sends environmental data back to a particular base station. Now, you can do this anytime you're developing software. In fact, if you are a successful software developer, and I am sure that everybody listening in here is a successful software developer, then you know that if your system is a success, people are going to ask for changes. And the more successful you are, the more variety of changes you're going to get. The more you've thought about what the variability should be early, the easier it's going to be for you to accommodate the requests for changes that you get later. Now, of course, you can't predict every kind of change, but experience has shown that even if you do some prediction of changes, you're better off when an unpredicted change occurs than if you have not thought about it at all. My mentor, Fapsan Rat, taught me this long ago. So think about the variabilities you want to have. Try to write those variabilities down. And those variabilities are things that you can talk about during the Scrum meeting as well. Also, part of yoga and part of being flexible in yoga is being able to rotate. And you would like your team to be able to rotate things like roles all the time. So you want people to go from, say, architect to developer to tester to project manager, maybe back to architect. They ought to be familiar with all the roles. Why is that? Well, if somebody has to drop out of the project or has some problem, then the person who could take over their role can step right in, and you won't have any loss. Notice one of the ideas here is that you should maintain knowledge. Make the system sustainable by maintaining a certain set of knowledge about it that everybody needs and that can be used by anybody. So you see I have a little representation there. There's one person, and that person is rotating, and that person rotates through different roles. Now you might look down at the bottom and say, well, what are those pictures down at the bottom there? Well, of course, when you go from one role to another, you tend to move from one office to another or from one working space to another. I worked at one company once, many years ago, where they forced us to change offices every 6 months. And once a year, you had to move from one floor to another. They felt that kept us sharp. They kept us from accumulating too much junk, and we just had to do it. And I always thought, good idea to be able to rotate. And these days, when you do the rotation, you definitely move from, say, one cube to another cube. You, of course, have to figure out how to personalize the cube in some ways to make it your own. But you need to be able to rotate. And a lot of the yoga exercises are concerned with being able to rotate. So it's a common principle again. Then another key principle is to try to strengthen your core. So what exactly does that mean? Well, as I said, in yoga, the core is essentially the middle of your body, the front, the abs, the back, the lower back, the lower shoulders, and so forth. And a lot of yoga is aimed at strengthening that part of the body. So what does that mean for software development? Well, in software development, your core group is the developers who make 80% of the changes. So you may say, well, that's true. You know, we only have a few people in our development group who are really good at making changes. The graph there is, again, data from a real project. And what it shows is for a project, the changes per developer per year, that is the black line, the black big part of the figure. And in red is the code in millions of non-commentary source lines. And you can see that over a number of years, the amount of code just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. And the ability of the developers to make changes tends to increase over time. So what you would like to do is to foster that. Have your developers practice refactoring. Have them practice changing code. You might even have a little contest every once in a while. Maybe take part of the Scrum meeting and have people demonstrate or compete at refactoring some part of the code to make some change. You will probably notice in this diagram as well that at one point the productivity, which is the line in black, just drops dramatically. What happened there? Well, if you look closely at it, you find out that the company went through some difficult times, among other things, and they also transferred the project to an offshore group. And when that happened, the productivity just plunged. So the core group was not doing anywhere near as well as it was earlier. The other thing that this does not show is that over time, as the core group gains experience, their productivity does tend to improve, but it is not, in general, a linear improvement. There are a number of reasons for that. I won't go into all of those reasons right now, but if you were to take a measurement of productivity in terms of changes per developer per year as a function of time and experience, you would see that it is not at all linear. Okay, so let's go on. Another key part of yoga is improving your balance. So yogis spend a lot of time. I used to spend time every day working on balance exercises, and I've pictured a little balance exercise down there at the bottom of the slide. So what does that mean for software development to improve your balance? Well, you would like your team to be balanced. You know the old saw that comes out of sports that says, "There's no I in team," that you hear people say often. So what you would like is to have a good working relationship among your team members. Have your team members complement each other. So one can do something that maybe somebody else can't do, or they are very familiar with different domains. So if we think of the floating weather station example, for instance, we might have some developers on the team who are very good at managing sensor code and being able to write code that controls sensors, whereas we might have another set of developers who are very good at the transmission process and who understand how to transmit the data back to the home station, etc. There'll be other domains. So these people will complement each other. But it's also important that they complement each other. When somebody does a good job, other people should recognize it. They should compliment them. Then, as I mentioned before, the team members should back each other up so that essential knowledge is unlikely to be lost. Let me give you another little example, and this is partly a thought example for this. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Voyager spacecraft. Voyager spacecraft have been out there and traveling for more than 30 years, or at the edge of the solar system. There's software that runs the Voyager spacecraft. That software has to be updated. So over 30 years, they update that software. Now, you know it's not going to be the same person working over the same 30 years. So somewhere or another, you have to capture the essential knowledge needed to be able to make the changes. This is really a key point in software engineering, trying to know what essential knowledge is about software. And I would say that we're still not really sure about that our research community is still trying to work on that idea somewhat. But you want to be sure that the essential knowledge is not lost so that you can keep making changes. Part of this is having mentors so that inexperienced team members will have mentors who can help them and can help them learn. As part of having the team members complement each other, one thing that can happen, that you can do, is have people from different domains review each other's work so that they start to become familiar with each other's domains. Again, that's a whole other idea, a whole other talk I could give. I'm not going to go into how to do reviews right now, but it is something that is important. And then again, we come back to the Scrum meeting. You can practice the balance during the Scrum meeting. The one thing you can do is while everybody's standing up, have them stand on one leg. And then as they're standing on one leg, talk about the results of their meditation and what changes they would like to see. As you can see, this will develop very skilled team members. They'll be really good at balance. They'll be really good at thinking about change. So an important thing to do is to try to improve your balance. Another idea that comes out of yoga is to salute the sun. Now, if you have ever had a yoga class, I am sure they taught you how to do sun salutations. This is an exercise. It's really a series of postures that the yoga master can lead the team in to start the day every day. It's something that helps you start the day. Now, I have shown images of people doing sun salutations. And you can see that in each image there are about 11 figures, and they're going through a series of postures, starting with standing up, down to the point where they're lying down on the floor, they're doing stretching exercises, and then they get back up and they stand up again. This particular exercise, called sun salutation, helps with strengthening the muscles, helps with stretching the muscles, helps to clear the mind, gives you some aerobics benefit. It's a wonderful way to start the day. So you could have your team start together as a team that can all do sun salutations together, led by the yoga master. I used to do this every day. It was wonderful. It helps clear the mind. It helps you to look ahead. It helps you to look up at the sun, forget about some of the nasty, irrelevant things that are going on around you, and just clear your mind and think ahead. Okay. Next point. And we're actually moving ahead a little faster than I expected. That'll just leave us time for a few more questions at the end, perhaps. The next point is to relax. For those of you who have taken yoga courses, you know that what happens in a typical yoga class is that they work you like crazy throughout the whole class. And then at the end of the class, just when all of your muscles are tired out and you're breathing hard, they do a deep relaxation. They have everybody lie down. I don't know if you can see it in the pictures there down at the bottom, but that's a group of people all lying on their yoga mats doing a deep relaxation exercise. What happens in a deep relaxation exercise is you lie down, you close your eyes, you focus on your breathing. You breathe in, you breathe out. And you try to clear your mind of everything. The yoga teacher, the yoga master, will lead you through this by saying, breathe in, breathe out. And then when everybody is at the point where they are nice and quiet and relaxing, the yoga teacher will start a chant. And I've suggested a chant that you might use for your software developers there. Amo, amo, amo. Some of you may recognize the origin of this chant. It is clearly closely related to some of the things that many people do in software development today. Now, it is true that on your team there may be some people who like to start early in the day, and some people who won't even start until after midnight. So some of them may be finishing the day, some of them may just be starting the day. Nonetheless, doing a relaxation, whether you're at the start of the day or the finish of the day, is helpful. And in fact, I always like to do deep relaxation at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. Helps clear your mind, get you ready for sleep, and so forth at the end of the day. Not only that, anytime I am in a stressful situation, I try to do a little relaxation. Helps clear the mind, puts you in a good frame of mind, helps relax the body, helps get you ready for all the things you know you're about to encounter. So, have the yoga master end the day with a group deep relaxation. Okay, so those are the 10 yoga principles. What about the rest of process. I mean, I really haven't talked too much about the key elements of process. Artifacts, roles, activities, what schedule you should follow, what risks you should identify. Notice that a process is a set of artifacts, a set of roles, a set of activities, where the roles perform the activities to produce the artifacts. I've just been talking about what it takes to be essentially a successful team and successful developers and all the things that you need to do for that. However, you still need to define the artifacts you're going to produce, and you need to be very specific about this. So it isn't just that you're producing code in a particular language. Maybe you're using Java or JavaScript or C++ or something like that. Doesn't matter what artifact you're using or what set of artifacts you're using, the yoga principles still apply. You may have a different set of roles. I used earlier the examples of architect, developer, tester, project manager. That's just one possible set of roles. You might have a different set of roles. Or you may have a very egalitarian team where everybody does everything. That's somewhat rare in my experience. I haven't seen too much of that, but I think that does happen more and more these days. But everybody needs to know what his or her role is. As part of the role, there are certain activities you need to do. Do you write code? Do you do reviews? Do you create tests? Do you run tests? There are activities that are designed to produce the artifacts or modify the artifacts. So when you define the process you're going to use, you must define those artifacts, those roles, and those activities. And then, of course, the schedule tells you what activity is being performed at what artifact at each time and what the criteria are for the artifact passing through that gate and going on to the next gate. The other thing in a good process, too, is risks. You need to identify what risks are likely to occur. As my colleague Will Trace mentioned, I have occasionally taught at different universities, like Moo University. There was a good novel about that university, by the way, if any of you have ever noticed. And one of the things I found most difficult to teach students was how to identify risks, even though risks are all around them. Not just software development risks in their whole lives and everything they did, but really key and really important to try to identify the risks and practice the risks. So it is up to you to define the process. And notice there are lots of changes, lots of variations in the process. You can apply the idea of commonality and variability to process just as well. So what I've outlined here on this slide 21, by the way, is commonalities about process. Every process incorporates these aspects. But then there are variabilities. As I said, the particular artifacts you use may vary, particular roles, particular activities, etc., that you use may vary as well. So you can apply that idea of commonalities and variabilities. Think of yourself as having a family of processes, and in different situations, you may use a different member of the family. However, you have to be careful about process. You don't want to use too much process and get too involved in process. You want to use just enough process. The next slide is a little example. It shows you why the Neanderthals became extinct. It's a little diagram of the hunting process that the Neanderthals were considering using. And you notice one of the Neanderthals says to the other, "I don't know, it seemed easier when we just went hunting." And the other Neanderthal says, "Yes, but Og assures me that this will improve our efficiency and keep us ahead of those Cro-Magnons in the valley." And you know what happened. So, got to be careful about how much process you have. You do need some process. You don't want to have too much process. You need somebody with a little experience in this area to help you to understand just how much process you need. And as part of that, I would like to give you a little quote from Albert Einstein. Einstein said, "Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler." Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. I had a very hard time, by the way, verifying that Einstein said this. I'd heard about it, and again, my colleague David Weiss helped me find this out. We actually found somebody who heard Einstein say this. Couldn't find it in anything he ever wrote, I don't think. It might have been one case. Fapsan Rat once told me he thought he saw something that Einstein wrote where he said this. But keep this in mind. This is a good guide for life as well. I'm not a real believer in talking about politics, but if you look at our current political system, it would be a good idea if they applied this particular dictum. Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. Finally, I want to give you one other quote and one other little example here. This is a quote from Isaac Newton. At least when I first saw it, I was told it was a quote from Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen farther than others, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants." And I thought, what a great quote. What a humble person Isaac Newton must have been. Of course, I was completely wrong. It turns out he was not. And then I learned a little bit more. It turns out there's a whole book written about this quote, written by Robert Merton. And the origin of the quote is, "Pygmies who stand on the shoulders of giants see farther than the giants," which is much more amusing, I think, and much less pretentious than the Newton quote. That was said by a monk named Bernard of Chartres in the 12th century. By the 17th century, it had a mutated, shall we say, change to the point of what Newton said. So think about that. I think of myself as a pygmy. I think there are lots of us pygmies. We just have to identify the right giants so that we can stand on their shoulders. As I've noted, I think Fapsan Rat is a giant. He is one of the giants on whose shoulders I have tried to stand, and I recommend his work highly. I just want to say one other thing. That's really the last of the slides. Just the last slide there is just a summary of the 10 yoga points. You might say, how come there are 10 yoga points? That sounds a little strange to me. Well, I was thinking of lots of different points, and then I thought about Einstein's dictum, everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I thought, okay, how can I simplify? Is there a good example or a good model I can follow? Well, we all know about the 10 Commandments, right? So if the 10 Commandments were good enough at the time to be given to us by, say, the Almighty, then maybe we shouldn't have more than 10 commandments or 10 principles for yoga. So for yoga, there are, in fact, exactly 10 principles. Now, these, again, are commonalities. You may have your own variabilities on them. But I hope that you learned from this. I hope you have enjoyed this somewhat. And I must tell you that now that I have been through this and I have recognized how much I can learn from yoga and software development, I'm kind of looking around to see what else could I learn from and put into software development. But that's a topic for another talk. I think I'm simply going to end here and leave things open for questions. As I say, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy your April 1st. And I'm going to turn things back over to Will.
Okay, thank you, Seth. That was very entertaining and enlightening, and definitely showed some light on our craft of software engineering. With that said, we've got a list of questions coming in, 17 in the last 5 minutes, and I'll do my best to get to them, but maybe we can take some of those offline. First question is, how many years of experience or what type of experience do you think you need to use yoga?
Well, just like anything else, I think you could start out with yoga right away, especially if you have a mentor. Yoga masters, yoga teachers study for years and years and years. If you talk to a typical yoga teacher, you'll find they've probably been at it for 10 years or more, and they continue to learn. One of the interesting things about yoga is that there are always more difficult variations on every posture that you learn. Once you think you've mastered a posture, turns out there's another variation. So you can start right at the very beginning. And in fact, starting with a yoga program right from the beginning is a good way to avoid bad habits, to avoid learning bad habits. The idea in yoga, for example, that you should think about changes, that's something you should think about right from the start. If you do that, you will have a definite advantage. So I don't think you need to have a lot of experience to start using yoga.
Okay, thanks. The second question, what advice would you give to an organization trying out yoga for the first time?
Very good question, Will. I must say to the audience that, when the speaker says that's a very good question, what the speaker means is, I got to think a little bit about that. I have to have some way of getting the audience preoccupied for a bit. So they say, that's a very good question. So, I'm sorry, what was the question again, Will?
What advice would you give
what
to
advice
an organization?
For organizations that want to start yoga?
And I know there was another question that came in, actually had to do with program managers that are part of the organization trying to do this for the first time.
Okay, so I have had quite a bit of experience in my career, and I know that Dr. Weiss has as well, and we've talked a lot about this, about introducing new concepts and practices into an organization. What you would like to do is start small. Start with a small group, introduce it, and be able to show that it has an advantage. Now, the way we always used to show that things had an advantage was we would do measures. Remember the charts that I showed that showed things like productivity? We would have a chart for quality also, and try to compare what the group using the new practices was doing compared to the old group. If you look at the work of somebody like Victor Basili in the software engineering lab, that's precisely the kind of thing they did. They had a long baseline. So start small. Do the minimum thing required to be useful. David Parnas used to say, work on the minimal useful subset first. Create the minimal useful subset and produce that first. So that's what you would like to do. So you need to find a group of people first who are interested in trying something new and trying something different, because it's not going to work if they're not interested in it. And then you have to be convincing, and you have to talk about what you're doing really on several different levels. If you are talking to software developers in the community, you generally talk about cost and productivity. They want to know how much things are going to cost when I use the yoga method. If you talk to managers like project managers or even program managers or CFOs or CTOs or someone like that, then you need to talk about value. And you need to say, here is the value you're going to get out of this. You're going to get so many more customers, a broader marketplace. You're going to get things out there to the customers when they want it, and keep the customers happy. So you have to be able to make those arguments at different management levels within the company. So you need to start by doing that, make sure people are behind you. It really helps if you can find an angel in the company. And an angel is somebody, usually a higher level executive, who likes what you're doing, thinks it's right, and will help connect you with the right people, help you get some funding if you need it, help you get started, and help you as you go along to make sure things go well. So start small, work incrementally, keep improving, keep spreading the word, so to speak. That's really the way I think you should do things.
Well, thank you. You know, several of our attendees pointed out the similarity between agile methods and some of the principles of yoga. Could you perhaps agree or disagree where the two are similar or maybe diverge?
Well, the idea of having a meeting every day, although I think that in Agile they call it a Scrum meeting, and our idea of having a Scrum meeting every day are definitely similar, but there's quite a difference between the two meetings. We always have our guitarist in there playing relaxing music. We get the people to stand on one leg, as I mentioned. We have them think about changes and propose changes. I don't know that all of that happens as part of a Scrum meeting. We also focus, I think, in yoga a lot more on design, although I haven't said a lot about it. But remember, one of the purposes is to produce sustainable software that will last a long time and can be easily changed. And I think that's a place where we differ with Agile methods. I don't think, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think Agile methods are particularly concerned with designing for change and designing for future and maintaining the knowledge you need in the future. So there are some similarities, I agree, but there are also some differences, I think.
Good. Here's a question. What is the evidence that yoga actually works?
Okay, so there's, as some of you may recognize, there is some problem with this. We can collect data, and we have some data, but companies are very reluctant to release data that shows that shows the efficacy of a particular method or any of the details. They hate to show productivity of their developers, for example. They hate to show things like that chart I showed on the quality interval that shows the number of bugs found by customers within particular periods of time. So I really don't have the permission to show you data like that. What I can tell you is that I have used yoga a number of times in a number of different places. It's not the cure-all for everything, just like Agile is not the cure-all for everything, or any other particular process is the cure-all for everything. But people who use it do seem to see an improvement. I also have, or at least David Weiss has told me he's had similar experience with software product line engineering, where he was actually able to publish some of the results. But what he found that when he introduced it somewhere and did the right measurements, that they would find a factor of about 2 to 3 improvement in productivity. He was able to show that to people. So the yoga is based mostly on my experience, although I know a lot of other people have used it as well. I think that Fapsan has used it in some places, for example. And it does produce sustainable software. I will continue to use it, of course. I have very recently retired, so I'm not doing as much software development as I used to. But it's mostly based on my experience.
Oh, okay. Well, we're running out of time. I see we currently have 30 unanswered questions, so there's a chance that we might dress them offline, and if Seth has the time, we'll post them to the website along with a copy of the presentation and the webinar itself. So, Seth, one last question. What's next for Seth Winis?
Well, thank you. I see I have maybe a minute to answer this question.
Take your time. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I'll try to be very quick. On one level, shall we say a lighter level, as I said, I'm looking for other things that might have some effects on software development that I could use. One of the things I've taken up lately has been juggling. And think about software development and think about juggling. You're trying to keep a number of balls in the air at the same time. And jugglers are able to do this very successfully. If I think about something like product line engineering, what are we trying to do? We're trying to produce a number of different versions of the same thing. at the same time. We're sort of juggling also. So I'm thinking, is there something we could learn from juggling that we can put into software development, into things like software product line engineering? That's one thing. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to work with a group of people to help other people do better at the job of creating sustainable software. We're thinking about putting together a company called Software Sustainment. And this is quite serious, by the way, where we can help people learn the principles that they need to know, and maybe do a little consulting. You know, I don't just want to sit on my couch and watch television all day as a retiree, so I'm interested in doing a little consulting work on that. And Dave Weiss has asked me if I'd like to join their group that's actually trying to do this. I think his group may be called AJR, but I think they're also thinking about calling it Sustainable Software. Then very, very quickly, a third thing is I have a radical idea for how to change software development. I think the way we motivate and compensate people is wrong these days, and what we should do is allow people to bid on the work that they want to do. If you know the idea of modules or even classes, we should allow people to form their own teams and bid on the classes they want to develop. Particularly, again, if they're working in a product line engineering environment, if their work is accepted, it should go into a pool of modules that are used to create products, and they should be paid royalties based on the sales of their products. So I call this an open market software development process. Parts of this have been tried in places, and we're kind of still waiting to see the results. So those are the sorts of things that I've been working on, and I'm looking forward to working on in the future. Thank you all for listening and for joining us.
Thank you, Seth. I'm afraid we have run out of time, and once again, thanks for the informative presentation and your insightful answers to many of the questions. And a special thanks to each of you for taking the time to participate today. This webinar was recorded and will be available online in a few days at learning.acm.org. Webinar. You can find announcements on upcoming webinars and other ACM activities at learning.acm.org and acm.org. Also, please fill out our quick survey where you can suggest future topics or speakers, which you should now see on your screen. On behalf of ACM, Seth Winis, David Weiss, and myself, Will Trace, thanks again for joining us, and I hope you will join us again in the future. This concludes the webinar.